What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Long time no see. As always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel, the site editor over at Dairyland Express, where we cover the Packers, Brewers, Bucks, and Badgers. I also have a new article out every Monday and Friday over at Cheesehead TV. And as it says at the bottom of the screen here, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. So welcome back. It's been, I think, 2 weeks now, and I apologize. With the short month of February, there is an added emphasis on writing just because of the fewer days and still trying to produce the same amount of content. But we are back. And for today's episode, we're going to discuss an article. I think it's a fitting time as well. NFL Combine Week is here. Free agency is right around the corner. And then, of course, the draft not too long after that. So we are going to discuss an article that I wrote over at Dairyland Express this past weekend, my 5 biggest positions in need for the Green Bay Packers prior to free agency. And of course, that is a very important caveat because as we all know, and we'll discuss it here with some of these position groups, how free agency plays out can certainly affect the outlook of a position, not only heading into the draft, but training camp, the preseason, and the regular season as well. So we'll probably update these rankings once, as the offseason continues to progress. But we're going to discuss my 5 big positions in need at this moment based on the 2022 roster. And then also get into a few extra positions as well that I think are certainly worth keeping our eyes on. And depending on what happens in free agency, any roster cuts, things of that nature, could certainly find their way into the top 5. Also important to note, these aren't in any particular order. These are just my top 5 positions in need at this moment. So let's start it off with cornerback. Cornerback, not quarterback. Cornerback with a C. I know we look at Jair Alexander. We look at Eric Stokes. The Green Bay Packers have a very, very good, a very, very formidable 1-2 punch at the cornerback position. However, last year in particular, we all saw the importance of depth at that position. It's one of the premier positions in football, after all. And right now, the Green Bay Packers do not have that. We know how good Jair can be, second team All-Pro in 2020. Eric Stokes, he was really, really targeted heavily last season. His opposing quarterbacks really tried to test him. Targeted 100 times, allowed only 51 completions, had 9 pass breakups. Certainly someone who was ascending as the season went on, improved week to week to week. Again, a very good 1-2 punch. But behind them on the depth chart at the moment are Shamar John-Charles, Keandre Thomas, and Kabian Ento. Combined, those 3 have 38 career defensive snaps, and all of them belong to John Charles. So the Green Bay Packers, they're going to add to this position. They're not going to go into training camp with only 5 cornerbacks on the roster. We know they're going to add to it, but they need to do more than that. This isn't just, we need some back end of the roster guys who, maybe can play some special teams, compete for a roster spot, be practice squad. They need to acquire some high-end talent. For starters, they need a slot corner, and maybe they feel good about John Charles and what he can offer. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to have any sort of insight on that. We saw very little of him last season, but maybe they look to bring back Shannon Sullivan. He's someone who's not going to break the bank. He's got experience. He knows his defense, and I know he's had his ups and downs, but there's been a lot more good with his career than there has been bad. Roswell Douglas, of course, is another candidate that the Green Bay Packers could look to re-sign. Right now, Spot Track, they come out with their projections for some of the more high-profile free agents, I guess I'll say. And right now, they have Roswell Douglas earning $9.2 million per year on a 4-year deal. So that's their projection for him. So is Green Bay going to be able to re-sign him? We'll have to wait and see how that plays out, the type of spending power that they have in free agency. But they should, if they can't, they absolutely still look to bring in some sort of veteran. They should look to use a top 100 pick on the position as well. Again, that is very, very thin behind Alexander and Stokes. And last year, we all saw the importance of having depth at that position. So cornerback, at least from what I'm seeing, not saying that this is, how everyone's thinking, I'm not saying that, but this seems to be one of those positions that isn't being talked about very much. And I think a lot of it, obviously, because they have like Alexander and Stokes, but the depth of the position, the need of high-end talent, this is absolutely one of my top 5 positions in need. Next up, we have edge rusher. And of course, there's a little bit of foreshadowing here because if we look at this position on paper, looks pretty darn good at the moment. You got Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Zadarius Smith, Jonathan Garvin, Tipa. But as we all know, things are likely to change at this position. It seems like the writing is on the wall and he's going to be playing elsewhere next season. Green Bay can save over $15 million in cap space if they are to cut him. Preston Smith's future, that's more up in the air. As I talked about on here, as well as wrote about in my Cut 'em, Keep 'em in prediction article, I actually think that Preston Smith is a really good extension candidate. Proved last year, he can be one of the top edge rushers in football, finished tied for 10th in total pressures forced last year. Rashawn Gary was third, I believe. And his cap hit this year is almost $20 million. He's not going to play on that deal. So Green Bay they could restructure him, even though this is the last year, and push cap space into more voided years. Not a fan of that in terms of future cap space. They could cut him, save about $12.5 million, or they could keep him, give him an extension, which could still save around $7 to $8 million per year is what over the cap is projecting. So I believe I said this on the previous video. I'd rather have Preston and save $8 million than not have Preston and save $12.5 million. So that's still up in the air. But if both Smiths are gone, without a doubt, need number one this offseason is edge rusher. As good as Rashawn Gary is, this is a heavily rotated position, and depth, even with the play of Gary and Smith last year, was still a concern. When those two weren't on the field, there was a noticeable drop-off, and I understand when those two aren't on the field, whoever comes in next, there's likely going to be some level of drop-off, but relying on Garvin, Tipa, Ladarius Hamilton to play significant snaps, none of those guys, at least from what we last saw, are or should be expected to do that at this point in their career. So if both Smiths are gone, as good as Gary is, he needs more help, and he needs more high-end help at that. If, as I'm predicting, Preston Smith is back, I would still have this on the to-do list. Spend a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a top 100 pick on this position. It's just too darn important. This is one of the most important positions in all of football. And as I mentioned, there was a noticeable fall-off when Smith and Gary weren't on the field last year. So go out there, add some more premium talent to that position, whether it's the draft or free agency. But again, not expecting them to have a ton of spending power in that regard. But edge rusher, it's just way too important. They need to go add to that position, even if both Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary are back this year. Need number 3, wide receiver. So this position, perhaps more than any other, the outlook of it can change very, very quickly. But right now, under contract for 2022 is Amari Rodgers, Randall Cobb, who could very well be a cut candidate. I believe Green Bay can save $6.7 million if they move on from him. Chris Blair, Rico Gafford, and Juwan Winfrey. That is the current state of the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room. So as we see all these mock drafts right now, and they have the Green Bay Packers taking a receiver, I know typically we shake our head at those, say, no, it's not going to happen. But depending how free agency plays out, if there's a year where it might happen, I have to think this is it. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, and the reason why I said this is a position that could change drastically is because Davante Adams, Allen Lazard, and MVS are all free agents. How many of those players are going to return? I tend to think that 2 of the 3 are going to. Which combination of the 2 or 3 of the 3, that's a debate we can have. But I think it's going to be Davante Adams, and I think it's going to be Allen Lazard, and MVS is going to be the odd man out. I just think all the signs point to Aaron Rodgers returning, and I just find it really hard to believe that Aaron Rodgers would be back, but Davante Adams wouldn't. On top of that, Adams, his career trajectory right now is that of a future Hall of Famer. The Green Bay Packers, they take care of those players. They offer those third contracts. I know Adams is asking for $30 million a year. We'll see how those negotiations end up going or working out. And I know the latest report from Tom Silverstein was that the two sides haven't talked since the season ended. But I believe it would actually be more against the Packers' nature to let Adams walk or not re-sign him than it would be to re-sign him. They take care of players of this caliber. So I think Adams is going to be back. So then it comes down to Lazard and MVS. I think it's going to be Lazard. One, his contract's going to be cheaper. SpotTrack is projecting that MVS lands around, I believe it's $8 million per year on a 3-year deal, I believe it was. Whereas Allen Lazard is a restricted free agent. If the Green Bay Packers put a second-round tender on him, his contract is just under $4 million. So more cost-effective to keep Allen Lazard. And I think just in what he offers with his entire game, from game to game, he's going to have more consistent production with MVS, there's very much that home run ability where there might be a game where he has 3 receptions for 112 yards, but then there might be several games where he has 1 or 2 receptions for 20 yards. And then again, Lazard's run blocking. They just think that between the cost and then what Lazard can bring week to week to this offense, they're going to go with him over MVS. I imagine that they would love to have MVS back. And as I wrote at Cheesehead TV recently, a couple weeks ago, whether it's MVS, whether it's a free agent, whether it's a draft pick, the Green Bay Packers absolutely have to add that element back into this offense. Green Bay Packers' big play ability from 2020 to 2021 took a step back, and that's not a coincidence because MVS missed several games last season. Just look at the NFC playoff game against the 49ers. Without MVS on the field, we know having that 4.37 speed that brings the big play ability. But on top of that, he creates for others. When the safeties have to worry about MVS going over the top, that's going to create opportunities for the other pass catchers. It's also going to create much, much better spacing. As I was saying, if we look back at that 49ers game, they weren't really concerned about Green Bay beating them over the top. Things were much more condensed in the middle of the field and closer to the line of scrimmage. Thus, passing the ball is much more difficult. So MVS, or finding someone who has that same ability, is going to be very important because the Green Bay Packers need that element in this offense. So I say all that to say wide receiver is certainly a top 5 need right now, just given its current state. If, as I predict, and pick whichever combination of the two you want, 2 of the 3 return, I still have it as a top 5 need because I do think that Randall Cobb is going to be cut for cap savings, although who knows, maybe he gets re-signed at a cheaper amount. Amari Rodgers is still an unknown, and the rest of those players currently have very, very little NFL experience. Next up, linebacker. Again, this is a very, very thin position. The only players under contract currently are Ty Summers, Ray Wilborn, and Isaiah McDuffie, although I think it's fairly safe to say that Chris Barnes will be back. He's an exclusive rights free agent. He can't negotiate with any other teams. If Green Bay offers him a league minimum deal, he essentially has to take it. So Chris Barnes will be back, but we don't know about Devondre Campbell. And I do certainly think that Barnes' play was improved from 2020 to 2021. There's a couple of factors into that. One, he was in the second year of his career. There's going to be that natural progression. 2, Joe Barry's defense. It is friendlier to linebackers than what Mike Pettin is. But also 3, he was Robin this year alongside of Devondre Campbell, whereas in 2020, Chris Barnes had to play the role oftentimes of Batman while Christian Kirksey was sidelined. So in that reduced role, we saw a more impactful Chris Barnes. So I think finding one for depth, because even if Chris Barnes back, even if they want him to be the guy, there is really no reliable depth on the roster behind him. So Green Bay needs to address that. But also if they can bring in someone, whether it's early on in the draft, Devondre Campbell, whoever it may be, where Barnes can play that Robin role, as I mentioned, I think we're going to see overall just a much more effective Green Bay Packers linebacker unit. And as I've said before, it's going to be really interesting to see if Campbell's play this last season altered how Green Bay views the linebacker position, because as we all know, it's not one they typically value. Last position in need before we get into the couple others to keep our eyes on, the interior defensive line, position that I think we talk about pretty much every year. Like the others before it, it's a thin one. There's Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, TJ Slayton, and Jack Heflin. We all know the motto that Packers fans often say, get Kenny Clark some help. And he did have more help this past season. Dean Lowry had a career year as a pass rusher. We saw flashes from Slayton, from Tyler Lancaster as well. However, the overall play in terms of rush DVOA, in terms of yards per carry allowed by the Green Bay Packers run defense unit from 2021 to 2020 was actually pretty similar. In fact, it was worse last year by those 2 metrics compared to 2020. So 1, they just need more bodies, and of course they're going to add to this. They're not going to have just 4 interior defensive linemen. But 2, they need to try to add some more reliable rotational players at a minimum who can come in and make an impact. Now, there's certainly those flashes that I mentioned from TJ Slayton that we all liked. Jack Heflin stole the show during summer and preseason last year, but relying heavily on a second-year 5th rounder and a second-year undrafted rookie, that comes with some obvious risk to it. Not saying that Green Bay can't do that and those guys can't be successful, but again, there's risk with that. They're young players and they're taken in those spot points in the draft for specific reasons. So Green Bay, whether it's free agency, and again, we don't know the type of spending power they're going to have, or whether it's an early round pick in the draft, something that we really haven't seen the Green Bay Packers do. The only real capital they've invested into this position is two fifth round picks, Slayton last year and then Kingsley Keke in 2019. They haven't spent top 100 pick on the position. They haven't spent any sort of, not even premium dollars, even middle of the road dollars on that position in free agency. And right now they're looking at a very, very thin group. So interior defensive line is a position Green Bay will absolutely have to address at some point this offseason. So those are my big five. 3 other positions to watch. Offensive tackle. One, because it's kind of like edge rusher, where you can never have too much depth at that position. And we saw that last year with all the injuries that occurred along the offensive line. The reason I didn't have it on this list is because of the current state of that room. Billy Turner is still under contract for 2022. I have to admit, torn on what I think is going to happen, but contrary to the article I wrote a few weeks ago, my viewpoint on it has changed. And if I had to pick right now, I think he's going to be back. Another option could be Josh Neyman. Again, this is just speculation because to our knowledge, we don't know if he's taken any reps at right tackle, but given that Bakhtiari we know he's going to be the left tackle. If Green Bay wants to get Josh on the field, it's going to have to be at the right side. So there's a potential option. And at some point, Elton Jenkins is going to return from his injury, and he could give Green Bay another option at right tackle as well. So given that, that is why I left that position, offensive tackle, off of this list for the time being. However, that could all change very, very quickly. If Turner's a cap casualty, or if Green Bay doesn't believe that, Josh is going to be their right tackle of the future and they just want to keep him strictly at left tackle, offensive tackle, finding that right tackle becomes a very, very big need. And again, even if everything I said is true, where Turner's back, they think Josh can play right tackle, Jenkins will be back at some point to play right tackle this season if needed. Again, offensive tackle is one of those positions where you could take in the first round, every other year, for example, and I would really have no issue with that whatsoever. It's just that important. Second position, tight end. From a blocking standpoint, the Green Bay Packers tight end room is in pretty good shape. In terms of run blocking grade, Dominic Daphne, Tyler Davis, Josiah DeGuara, they all finished in the top 17 among all tight ends last season in run blocking. We don't know what the future for Mercedes Lewis holds, but again, another very, very good blocker. However, what they need, and again, this is an article that I wrote at Cheesehead TV, they need a pass-catching tight end in a very, very bad way. This offense greatly missed Robert Tonyan last season when he went down with an injury. Up the seam, over the middle, just a reliable pass-catching option for Rodgers in the red zone. This offense missed him, and that element, again, similar to what we talked about earlier with MVS, whether it's Tonyan, whether it's a free agent, whether it's a draft pick, Green Bay needs to find a true pass-catching option. DeGuara is going to he's going to have pass-catching responsibilities in this offense, but let's not confuse what he's asked to do and what Tonyan is asked to do. Two very different things. And so Green Bay needs to find that element. The reason why I didn't have this position in the top 5 is because of who they have: Davis, DeGuara, Daphne, and Mercedes Lewis at the moment. Is that an ideal group where you'd want to go into the new season with? No, again, you want to find a true pass catching option. But if they absolutely had to, they did secure the number 1 seed last year in the NFC with that group of tight ends. So that's why I didn't have it as a top 5 need at the moment, although finding a pass-catching tight end should absolutely be on their radar, again, if it's not Tonyan. And one other thing I want to mention about tight ends, rookie tight ends very, very, very rarely ever contribute during that first season. It is a very, very difficult transition at this position. You have to know blocking techniques like a lineman, run routes, route concepts like a receiver, and just have that well-rounded understanding of the entire offense. So if Green Bay spends an early round pick on the tight end, expectations should be tempered. Last position, safety. again, this is one of those positions where it's top heavy. You got Darnell Savage, you got Adrian Amos. Those are going to be your top two safeties this year. No debate whatsoever in that regard. But Savage is coming off a down year. He didn't take that step forward from year 2 to year 3. In fact, I think you could argue that he actually went backwards. And then behind those two, the depth is a concern. Henry Black got picked on while he was in coverage. Other safeties are Enos Gaines, Sean Davis. Very little to no NFL experience in that regard. So this is a defensive system under Joe Barry where safety is a important role, but also a difficult one as well. They're asked to help in the run game. Tackling is at a premium, but also in that cover 2 look, they have to be available over the top to limit the deep play, help the cornerbacks. It's a very, very tough position to play in that defense, which of course makes an important one. And Green Bay does play, they didn't do nearly as much dime under Barry as they did under Mike Pettin. There's still 3 safeties on the field at a fairly regular rate. So adding to that position, trying to find an upgrade for Henry Black if possible, should be on their to-do list as well if they can make it work in free agency or in the draft. So there you have it. Those are my 5 big positions in need, along with 3 other ones to keep our eyes on. And remember, a lot of change happens in the offseason, so these could all change. It's very much in the coming weeks on which positions are in the top 5 and which ones are left out. You can find this article in the link below or head to Dairyland Express. You can find all my work there as well as at Cheesehead TV. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Please hit like on this video, hit subscribe. I do greatly appreciate it. We'll be back with some more regular content in the coming days, the coming weeks. As always, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and go Pack Go.